Hey, welcome everybody. You're on Civil Conversations, hosted by GROWL Agency. Today, we're really excited, Wayne, about a guest that we have on. How are you doing, Wayne?
So far, I'm doing great. I'm sitting here in old Tucson on a kind of an extended work vacation, biking and hiking and enjoying kind of perfect weather.
Well, I appreciate you coming out of your daily hiking and biking to have a conversation with us today. I'm really excited today that we have Auden Schendler on. How you doing, Auden?
I'm great.
Yeah, thanks a lot for being on. And Auden's the Senior Vice President of Sustainability for Aspen Skiing Company. And I think most of our listeners probably know Aspen Skiing Company. It's in a beautiful part of the country in Aspen, Colorado, but they own, I don't know, hundreds of resorts probably around the country and world. I'm not even sure of the footprint, but you can probably give us a little introduction here in a second and all that you're doing. But before we get there, I want to say, Wayne, for our listeners again, if people are first-time listeners, this is Civil Conversations, and this is Wayne Hare. Do you want to just give your little, 30-second commercial about what Civil Conversations and who you are, and then I'll let you dive in and introduce Auden.
30 seconds, is that all?
That's all you get, Wayne. This is Auden's show, not yours.
Uh, about 4 years ago, due to the political climate, I was motivated to start writing about race, trying to achieve understanding and really harmony, if you will, between the races and for the country. And then when George Floyd was killed while in police custody, the project that we called a Civil Conversations, or the series, we morphed it pretty quickly into a nonprofit called the Civil Conversations Project, and that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to talk about race in a way that people can hear it, and not just turn away and be angry, in order to bring some understanding to something that has plagued this country for 402 years at this point. So civilconversationsproject.org. Check us out.
Yeah, thank you, Wayne, for that. And, we have a lot of recordings, growlagency.com/CCP, that we have 6 of our episodes from 2020, and this is the first one for 2021. And I tell you, it's really been a learning for me as we have discussed Civil War and racism in the US, Confederate monuments, false narratives, and even relational policing. Has been a really fascinating discussion that a lot of people, we had a lot of feedback on. But now we're going to move into, really, I think one of the things we're going to be talking about, race in America, Black in America. We're going to have some great discussions, but why don't we move forward? And Auden, if you don't mind, let's give a little introduction from you, so people can learn a little bit about who's Auden and this small little organization you work for.
Yeah, so Aspen Skiing Company has 4 mountains in the Aspen area. We own 3 hotels. We have a hotel in Ketchum, and then we have a partial ownership in Altera, which has resorts all over the US.
That's right.
We're privately held, and that's actually going to come up in this conversation because it gives us freedom to do things. My job is sustainability, and we define that as what you need to do to stay in business forever. So if you think about that, my primary work has actually been on climate policy and energy issues. But the other things you need a stable society. You need justice. You need a functional education system. You need to be able to house people and pay them well. You need healthcare. So those issues are all under my purview, with a kind of overemphasis being climate change. And that's relevant to this conversation because there's very little space between the climate conversation and the justice conversation. They're basically the same thing.
Yeah, I really like that, how you say what we need to do to stay in business forever. And I think, which must be very interesting conversations that you have, because a lot of times it's more than just looking at, we're going to have snow this year or not, right? I think they're looking about how we're going to treat our employees, how we're going to treat our guests, how we're going to treat our customers, how are we today and how are we in 50 years from now or more. So I appreciate you bringing that up. All right, Wayne. Well, why don't we get started? Where would you like to start this conversation at today, Wayne?
um, uh, what's the phrase called? Not truth in advertising, but just to make sure that things are out in the open and above board. I used to ski patrol at two of the different Aspen Ski Company mountains, Buttermilk and then Snowmass, and I started there coming up on 20 years ago, I guess, and I got to know Auden there, and then as I've been on the board for High Country News for a long time, and Auden is involved with High Country News and a supporter of High Country News. So we've known each other on a friendly basis for a long time, and I reached out to him. I don't know, maybe pretty recently, maybe 4 weeks ago, and just said, "Hey, I haven't been in touch with you for a long time. What have you been doing? And here's what I've been doing." And that was at that time that I found out that not only is he still tasked with sustainability for the Aspen Ski Company, but he's also tasked with this project that they intentionally haven't named. I think that's interesting, and he can talk about that. But it's in line with racial justice within the country. So when he responded, I visited with him along with Joe Newhoff, the Civil Conversations Project Executive Director, and we were stunned, in a very, very rewarding and pleasant way, that the Aspen Ski Company has a senior vice president specifically tasked with, I'm going to say racial justice. Auden might tweak that, and has a team behind him, money behind him, and a long list of things that they are contemplating doing. I've been knocking around, racial justice and particularly diversity in the outdoors for a long, long time. And I've heard lots of companies and nonprofits talk about it, but I haven't seen very many put any money or any real effort behind it. So by the time I got done talking with Auden, I wanted to go back to work for the Aspen Ski Company until I'm not on this earth anymore. Truly, I'm that excited and respectful of what they're doing. And so I'd like to ask you, Auden. I'd like to start with. So what I'm hoping to happen today, Auden, is just a real conversation between you and me and Greg. I'd like to know what the Aspen Ski Company is doing, but then more importantly, I'd like to know why they're doing it, and maybe even why you personally are involved and what your thoughts are. So what is Aspen Ski Company doing in support of racial justice? And please feel free to name your project or use a different term. It's all you.
Yeah. So, to frame this, one story I want to share is we have some Black employees, and we've reached out to them. One of them is named Darnell, and we said, "Sir, what should we be doing?" And he said, "You got to keep doing what you're doing. We treat people well. The golden rule has been an element of our guiding principles for years. There's an element of kind of blindness to celebrity here, and everyone gets treated like a normal person." And I thought, well, that's not a real great path forward, right? Because it basically it missed the need to be intentional and to change something. We're a very white community. We're a very powerful community. And to some extent, we have an obligation to lead because we have a national profile. So after George Floyd was killed, that I think for us, for the nation, was a seminal moment. It was a public execution, and it was done so intentionally that obviously all of the terrible things that have happened over the last 30 years affected us, but that really got us. And what we started to basically say, what ought we do? And the most obvious first thing we needed to do would be to make an attempt to diversify our workforce and our employees, but also our visitors. Of course, we needed to use voice on the issue, and we did. Making a social media statement about George Floyd and so forth, but you don't want to just do that because it's empty and token unless you back it up. So we said, let's start a relationship with the Black community in Denver with an intentional goal of recruiting out of Denver. And let's also just get to know people in the Colorado Black community as a start. And the interesting piece of that is we went in thinking we're going to hire 20 college age Black people from Denver and bring them in, and we're going to, make it work for them, and we're going to make a real effort. It didn't work. And it didn't work because you can't just do that. You can't just hire out of a new market because nobody even knows like what you're doing. We had people saying, can I commute from Denver on a daily basis to Aspen? So like we hadn't even explained who we are, where we are, and developed that relationship. So what was interesting is that whole thing is going to take 5 years, and it didn't work. But what happened is we invited a cohort of leaders from the Denver Black community to Aspen. And they came and toured, and we talked to them. And then toward the end of it, we sat around the fire with our CEO and some other senior managers, and a guy named Quincy Shannon, who is a leader in the Black community in Denver, and he's a dean of students at a middle school there. And he also is a preacher at a church. He's an amazing guy. He said, let's talk for a minute. Why are you doing this? And Wayne, we're going to talk about that here, but we had this pretty amazing conversation that was very open, and a kind of a precept of it was, hey, I'm going to say some dumb things, and this is going to be uncomfortable, and that's okay. And we can get into that more. But then they said to us, this isn't you give to us. This is a give and take. And we want you to come to Denver. We want to take you on a tour of 5 Points. We want to eat some Southern cuisine. We want to spend time with you. And just as COVID was kind of re-erupting, we went back to Denver. Again, it was me, it was our CEO, it was other senior managers. And we spent 2 days in Denver with Quincy and a bunch of his friends and colleagues. And that was profound. And there are a lot of stories that come out of it. But essentially what that has been is relationship building and kind of culture sharing and trust building. An example of that is we had these guys out. We did a bunch of stuff. We took a bunch of pictures. We did not post one photo on Instagram or social media because obviously that would be exploiting the experience. So we're trying to make these decisions to be intentional about this exchange. But you see it's going to take a lot longer. It's not a quick fix. It's a long cultural evolution and relationship build.
Wow, you had a lot of wisdom and insight coming right out of the gate. So good for you. I give you a thumbs up on that. What are a few of the things that you anticipate that you might do to do whatever it is that you're thinking you're doing, I guess? Is it fair to say that you support that this project is in support of racial justice? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Wayne, in our conversation with Joe, I had said, I don't like this DEI framing, diversity, equity, and inclusion, not because it's wrong, but because we don't want to be perceived as hopping on the bandwagon of the latest trend. And initially people would say DEI, and I was like, what the hell are you talking about? What does that even mean? So I'm not a fan of acronyms. This is explicitly about racial justice. And I'm going to talk about this. This is explicitly about Black American justice, because one of the things we ran into in our community, so that the ski industry is very white, and our valley is white in terms of lack of African American community, but there's a massive Latino population that is critical to our industry, that is more than half of our schools, that are our friends and neighbors. And so we often would say, well, we have, racial diversity and we need to support it, but it's the Latino community for us. And what that missed, and this is all part of our learning. What that missed, and people had to say this to us, is that the Black experience in America is what we are talking about here. And you have an obligation as a leader in the national community and as a media presence and as a influencer of powerful people to be part of the fix here. And we understand that now, but I don't think we understood it initially. And so that, what I'm talking about is your whole effort here, both of you, is the Black experience in America is fraught with so many challenges that are almost unfathomable. So let me give you an example of one from the work we're trying to do. When Quincy Shannon came out here, he said, how do I know I'm safe in this community? When I drive around Colorado, I can't always get gas. And this was around the fire. And I heard that and I thought, what happens when Quincy can't get gas? And how do we ensure that someone like him comes into our community and feels welcome and honored and appreciated? And that kind of flipped our logic, right? Because we were saying, bring in more Black visitors, bring in more Black employees, and people will feel comfortable. No, you have to make people comfortable so they will come. And so one of the steps that came up is, how do we express a welcomeness to the Black community? Now, you may know that Aspen has been a bastion of tolerance for gay rights for over 40 years. We were hosting Gay Ski Week here in the 70s. It's going on right now, actually. And we have a very, very opening, welcoming relationship with this group. We love these guys. How do we do the same thing for the Black community? And when after Quincy left, we noticed there was a Black Lives Matter banner not far from the gas station in Woody Creek. This is the middle of nowhere. Mm-hmm. And I told Quincy about it. And he said, that is amazing. Can you send me a picture? And so that led to this idea of maybe you need to put a Black Lives Matter banner or a mural or something, say at the top of Aspen Mountain, one of the most iconic properties in the United States, so that when people arrive, you're making an explicit statement in the same way that when the Gay Ski Week comes, we roll out a giant rainbow flag. And so that's the kind of thing that we're exploring right now. We're actually looking at, is it a banner? Is it a mural painted by a Black artist, maybe from Denver? Where does it go? And those kind of questions. So that's the tip of the iceberg. Obviously, We're trying to train our employees. We're trying to educate ourselves. We've had a community read of Ta-Nehisi Coates' book, Between the World and Me. And then COVID made it impossible to have a big meeting and book club about it. But that's where our head is at.
I want to bring up, and I appreciate all that, Auden. And, one of the things is I was doing a little bit of research for this and just thinking about, I don't know many Black skiers. I know Wayne, and when I was in college, I went to school in Wisconsin. I was on ski patrol, and I just think about back in those days of not really remembering many Black skiers, and then looking at some data, even on our Olympics and that. So there just hasn't been many, I think 5% is maybe African-American skiers, right? So you're kind of like, it's in an industry that we just don't have a lot of guests coming that are is in a growing industry. I also, when I was looking up some things, there's this Jim Dandy Ski Club that's the first Black ski club in the United States. That's real popular. It's out of Detroit of all places. I mean, for skiing, I don't think of Detroit as a mecca of downhill skiing, but I know up in the UP. So I wonder, all the things that you're doing, how can we be more inviting? Like, what can you tell other businesses that maybe are in the same boat as you, but like, how do we get these like Black ski clubs interested and feel safe, or wanting to come and experience maybe Aspen Mountain? And maybe they have, and I just didn't find anything as I was looking quickly through research. But we don't have Black skiers in Olympics. We don't have those kind of things. So people like me, if I'm a young Black person, I don't see that as an avenue of maybe something I'm going to go and excel at. So that's just a couple points.
So there is a major national organization called the National Brotherhood of Skiers.
Okay.
And they have been coming to Snowmass and Aspen for many years.
Sure.
So one, that's an opportunity. And a second thing is that, again, Quincy Shannon has a group called Ski Noir in Denver. And he brings Black youth out into the mountains for an experience of skiing. Now, a note on that, our concern was, what good is it if you bring a kid out and he gets to ski one day or 1 year in his life and never gets to ski again? But in talking to Quincy, those moments can be transformational because they're seeing a new world, a new economy, a new way they can make a living. And it is, for him, it was transformational, and it can be for others. So the goal isn't one and done, but even if it were, there's value there. Here's a point that was also kind of profound and interesting to us. I recently talked to Henry Rivers, he's the president of National Brotherhood of Skiers. And I asked him this question: when you come visit us, do you want us to roll out the red carpet and have a welcome ceremony and bring in all the local police chiefs and announce it in the papers and put a banner on the mountain? Or do you want to be just a human being who comes and skis? Because I didn't know the answer. I didn't know, look, we don't want to be called out for our Blackness. We just want to come ski at your resort like everybody else. And Henry said, we want it all. We want to have that opening ceremony. And in fact, in many of the communities, we get that. And we want the red carpet, and we want to ski with your CEO. And personally, that was what I was hoping he would say, because we don't just want these guys here in a transactional way. And this is true for any of our guests. We want a relationship with our visitors. We want to know this community and who they are, and we want them to understand our worldview, and we want to learn from them and they from us. So to me, that was a pretty interesting insight, that it should be intentional, it should be acknowledged, and that we can proceed in that way.
There's certainly elements there for education with staff and community. We have organizations, for that any kind of week or any kind of thing you're having. I think there's an opportunity there. I don't know, what are your thoughts on all that, Wayne? I mean, you're probably familiar with these organizations, and I'm not sure if National Brotherhood of Skiers, but I think, that's exactly that's one of the questions I had with Auden, is like, how do you approach these instances, and I love that you have this really open door policy on open thinking. I think what I get excited about. Thoughts, Wayne?
Well, Auden, you touched on so many things that so many people miss. I don't even know where to begin to respond. But I'll just start rambling, and Greg, you can tell me when my time is up.
Well, give them a chance to maybe ask a question or give them a chance to respond. So Wayne has a way of just like talking for 20 minutes, then we have to catch up to him on it. So, but I think, one thing, this is why the banter back and forth is so good on it with Wayne, because he sees things or through his conversations with organizations across the country and his experience. So do you have a couple points maybe that we can collaborate on a little bit, Wayne, based on what you've been listening to?
I might. I was really pleased, Auden, and I was surprised to hear you say that this experience or this effort is exclusively about the Black experience in America. I do feel like I've pretty much stopped when I talk about race. I've pretty much stopped using the term people of color because I'm really not talking about. I'm just really not talking about Asians and Native Americans and Hispanics. All those groups have brown skin, but the Black experience has always been different in this country. I want to read you something that the renowned columnist, conservative columnist, I want to throw in there, David Brooks, wrote a couple of years ago. I've been traveling around the country for the past few years studying America's divides, urban, rural, red, blue, rich, poor. There's been a haunting sensation the whole time that's hard to define. And it is that the racial divide doesn't feel like the other divides. There is a dimension of depth to it that the other divides don't have. It's more central to the American experience. We can appreciate the truth that while there have been many types of discrimination in our history, the African American experience is unique and different. Theirs are not immigrant experiences, but involve a moral injury that simply isn't there for other groups. We're a nation coming apart at the seams, a nation in which each tribe has its own narrative, and the narratives are generally resentment narratives. The African American experience is somehow at the core of this fragmentation, the original sin that hardens the heart, separates Americans from another, and serves as a model and fuel for all the other injustices. I concluded from that he was saying something that I've been saying for a long time. If you peel back the layer of anything that's negative, that isn't working, maybe you have to go to 3 layers. I don't know, but in every case, you will find racism. If I can move on, I just want to talk really, really briefly about that person's comment about feeling safe. There's a very renowned professor of Black history at the Portland State, Walida Imarisha. You can Google her. She's an amazing woman, and she travels the state of Oregon, which is the only state to ever come into the Union with a clause in their state constitution excluding Black people from living in Oregon. That wasn't taken out of that was intentionally not removed from their constitution of 1992. While I was living in Oregon, my son was born there. Technically, I was an illegal immigrant. But when she travels the state, simply talking about the history of the state, people are so angry and it's so contentious that she has to travel with armed security. So I'll kind of yield the floor back to you, Auden, or to you, Greg.
Those are powerful statements, and I appreciate you, reading that out, because I think, Auden, we're talking about this moral injury, and it's not this immigration, where they came, we immigrated here to this fine United States, where, we have this unfortunate, hundreds of years that's been building up, and how we're dealing with it now. I don't know if we all have a way to do it, but it is leaders like, I think, Aspen Ski Company, and how everybody is like reaching out to have these conversations. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but Wayne and I have gone through these conversations about each state, what's in their constitution, how racism is still built in. It's very unfortunate. So I think it is this continued education and welcoming part, but I don't know. Well, I'll just leave that up open for you, Auden, any kind of comments back. But
yeah, I mean, I'll respond to a few things. I've read everything James Baldwin has written, and I read it many years ago. Baldwin said that the history of race in America is the history of America. And I don't think I understood that until the present time, when, you know, some of the things you're talking about, Wayne, come up. And David Brooks' comments are right on, but Brooks has been a purveyor of the notion that poor people are responsible for their situation. You know, he is not. I don't admire David Brooks. And if you want to read criticism of him, Matt Taibbi has been ruthless on him. So I appreciate the words, but I don't really respect the guy. You know, part of the way to understand, I think, for us to understand the Black experience, for white people to understand the Black experience in America, is I grew up in New Jersey in the 70s and 80s. It was one of the most corrupt places in the world in terms of governance and police. And I didn't like the police. And to this day, I kind of have a fear of abuse by the police. And yet I'm the perfect guy to get pulled over, right? Tall, white American. I know how to behave. And I'm a little scared. So if I can put myself in the shoes of a Black person, it's almost unfathomably scary to imagine that. And then when you layer on some of the things that we're understanding sociologically, like surveys of emergency room staff show that they believe Black people have a higher tolerance for pain, right? They don't need anesthesia. And if you ask for painkillers and you're Black, you're less likely to get them because you're probably an addict, right? I mean, that pervasiveness, basically everywhereness of this prejudice is so, I think, stunning that it's hard for white Americans to understand. And it takes a Quincy to ask that question of you. How do I know I'm going to be safe? Last point I'll make is this region can be a model for the world. And so that is our role. And one of the things we have done in the Roaring Fork Valley, this valley is a pioneer of the concept of community policing. And the way to understand that is that when the cop comes up to you, instead of saying, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" You know, which is the worst power play ever. It's basically, "How can I help you?" And a number of years ago, this was before any of this was 5 years ago. There were two, an 18 and 19-year-old, I believe, Black kids who had held up a store and had shot someone on the run in the valley. This would have played out anywhere in the US with the cops killing the kids. They had a gun, and it didn't. And I went to the police chief in Basalt, a guy named Greg Knott, who was a football player and has a shaved head and wears a bulletproof vest, so he's this massive presence. And I said, "How did you do it?" And he said, "I stayed up for 36 hours and I coordinated with every agency in the valley to prevent them from getting killed." And it's that level of intentionality that we're trying to bring also to how we deploy whatever programs we end up deploying.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I always look for those authors that we put as links and for people to learn more. So I appreciate you, Auden, one, being well read and having kind of the banter back and forth. And, you know, we have talked about we've had lots of conversations about, well, you know, if you're poor and you're Black, you know, just work harder, right? We've had that discussion about how wrong it is, and kind of like we've had two great ladies on that talked about what it's like for young Black kids, poor Black kids too, to be, and even I think any it doesn't matter if they're poor or not, what the struggles they have, that if it's just me and you and Wayne growing up, and we're all from equal, let's say in the same neighborhood, we're not all held equal in what's available to us. So I appreciate you bringing that up, because again, we've been having that discussion through most of our episodes. Wayne, what are you thinking about all this? With what we're saying about, David Brooks and everything like that.
Well, there are, to my chagrin and embarrassment, there are a few people who have schooled me on race, helped me understand things I didn't fully understand, who are white. It's a little disconcerting to be schooled and learn something about race from white people. But I'm sitting here and I'm learning from Auden. I will say that. I'm pleased to hear you mention the phenomenon of and you were referring to David Brooks, but it's across the country, how poor people are responsible for their own situation, right? Mm-hmm. And one of the things that factors into people's resistance to being open to racial justice is a set of beliefs, and one of those beliefs is the narrative about American meritocracy, right? I think some of that belief might have been blown out of the water to some extent with the college admission scandals. People, kicking in $1 million or whatever to get the kid in school. So much for meritocracy. But it is a widely held belief that that Black Americans it was their fault. They just need to work harder, and drop the criminal element and the drugs, and that's just a narrative that comes from a really strong, hundreds years old narrative about who we are as a country. So what you're trying to do, or what the Aspen Ski Company is trying to do, and you personally trying to do, what I'm trying to do, and Greg's trying to do with the Civil Conversations Project, is really, gently, at least in our case, but persistently, try to break through that narrative so that people understand why Black communities look so shitty. I think it was Richard Nixon coined a term with a senator from Vermont. Pretty famous guy. I can't remember his name. They called it benign neglect of the ghettos that the government had, forced through laws and through customs to get Black people to live in, and then neglect them. So they, no investment from banks, not really good police response, fire response, infrastructure, the whole thing. When the Federal Highway Administration built interstates across the country, they intentionally and the very just within the last few years, the current head of the I think Federal Housing Agency apologized for the intentionality of the federal government putting interstates through Black neighborhoods or between white and Black neighborhoods to intentionally create a barrier. They even had a term for it. They called it getting rid of Niggertown. So there's an unending list of things that we could talk about that has made it difficult for people to particularly Black people to not be poor. And I'm glad you brought that up. I'm glad that you're working on that narrative. So that's that. Thanks.
One of the things I think, Maud, when you're going through it, came to my mind is how can companies build in about anti-racism into their credo or whatever their values, especially when you serve such an industry with people around the world coming to ski at Aspen, with all different feelings and things like that. I just wonder what companies, in your mind, what can they do? I mean, lead by example, but how do you educate this with employees or with guests, or, I know it's a big question, but it's one that I think we're doing as a small organization, and as we lead other companies come to GROWL and ask us, like, how can we formulate our thoughts around this and build it into more than just an employee manual or a plaque on the wall, So I don't know, what are you seeing, or what do you, I hear what you're doing. What recommendations do you have?
Yeah, well, we're still figuring it out, but I think what leadership is, is doing the thing so that you enable other people to do it.
Okay.
I've been arguing internally, hey, if we hang a Black Lives Matter sign on our mountains, I guarantee 10 other resorts are going to do it after us, but it took the first one to do it. So you got to start doing some stuff. And it's dangerous and it's risky. We will get crucified for that because, and per your point, Wayne, that language may be incendiary. Maybe there's a different way to do it. But there's other, we've also led in social media posts and we've gotten hammered for that. So you have to be willing to take this risk. One interesting story is we released our community read book was Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me. And we did it and we got some really interesting feedback from an employee who actually said, I was scared to send you this feedback. And he sent a lot of criticism of a lot of the kind of texts of anti-racism, including white fragility and including Coates. And the criticism was, these people are essentially arguing that white people can never escape racism. It's always there. And in a way that's essentially cementing the status quo. And it counters what Martin Luther King was saying about loving your brother, about the beloved society, about the possibility of reconciliation. And that's problematic. So I guess what I'm saying is that you have to have a radical openness to conversation when the inclination is to shut down the other point of view. I see that in myself, take the righteous position and shut down the other point of view. The guy who brought this to me and was actually a kid that I taught high school to 20 years ago. And he's a very smart guy and very well read. And he said to me at one point, why do we have to pick a side on a given issue? Why can't we absorb the range and breadth of the conversation without, having to plant a stake in the ground? And he wasn't saying that we shouldn't be equitable and just. He was saying, you don't have to take Jordan Peterson's side of an argument or Ta-Nehisi Coates. You have to understand and listen in a way that isn't polluted by the perspective you're trying to overlay on what you're listening to or reading.
I believe in that too. We've had that discussion around Civil War monuments, if you can imagine, Auden, and about always these beautiful brass statues of white men on horses in the center of towns, right? And a lot of people want them to be, I think Wayne included, would say, hey, let's remove them. They're false narratives, they're not the heroes of our nation that we want to portray. While other people are saying, why don't we put a statue up with the same size and stature of an African-American facing that statue and telling both sides of that story as it should be told in history, right? So there's a little bit of that. I mean, we've been having this discussion, I think, Wayne, for months now, where it comes up like that. And I'd like you to kind of respond, why do we have to pick a side, Wayne? And I mean, we've been having the same discussion around the Civil War monuments, and this is another perfect one about that.
Are you asking me or Auden?
I'm asking you, Wayne. I'm asking you. What do you say to Auden and our listeners, or to me, that says, if I say to you, Wayne, I want to learn, I don't want to pick a side, right?
And just to be clear, an important point.
Yeah.
I'm saying let's absorb conversation, but in the monument case, there's an evil side and a non-evil side, right?
Yes.
And this is true in my work in climate. they're not two sides to the conversation. So I wouldn't be advocating, let's tell both stories, No, a monument is something you honor. And we're not honoring the Confederacy.
Yep. No, I agree to that, Auden. Thank you for clarifying that, and I'm totally agreement of that. And I'm not here to say Wayne knows me and listeners don't. I'm not anti any of this. I'm just bringing it up for our conversation. And I look at these moments and these conversations, Wayne, to keep pushing the ball forward a little bit. It's an uphill battle, but that's why I asked you this question. About how do we absorb information, Wayne? How do we take history? How do we take both sides, and listen?
Well, yeah, that's kind of the $64,000 question. I don't know if you're old enough or if Auden's old enough to remember what that refers to, but I think that what Auden said and what that young man said to Auden is super interesting. I want to dwell upon that. I want to dig into that deeper with Auden and maybe that young man, to be honest, because having conversations about race is really, really a challenge. People's hackles go right up, boom, and there they are.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, you got to kind of sneak into it. I would say that of all in all the conversations I've had about race with white people, almost 100% of the time, pretty quickly into that conversation, a white person will say, well, it's not really about race so much as it's about class. No, it's about race. And so you have to get through that barrier. In the book, White Fragility, which I have, kind of mixed feelings about, there's an entire short chapter, but an entire chapter called The Rules of Engagement, the hoops you have to jump through so that white people will listen and then continue to listen. It's just this really long list. And the first time I heard that phrase, I obviously it was the first time I hadn't heard it before, but I knew exactly what the woman was talking about. So I know what you're talking about. And then I Googled it and I found out that's actually like a term it's in the dictionary. I don't know about if you don't need to take sides. I need to I need to dwell upon that a little bit. But the key is to be. Go ahead, whoever is that. Auden?
Auden.
I wouldn't make too much of his point. Was specifically in engaging with conversation and writings.
Okay.
In that you tend to go into white fragility, say, and you're like, I'm on her side, but you should just absorb it. You don't have to be on her side ever. You can take that information in. And one of the things that she has done that I have a problem with, Wayne, and I'm curious because you may have a different take here, is I don't want my conversation with a Black American to be so puckered and so stilted that I'm constantly worried about trespass. And one of the things I value about what you guys are bringing to this, and also, Wayne, to the fact that I've known you for 15 or 20 years, and I just know you as Wayne, and we can have a conversation. But I don't want to overlay a stiltedness that prevents me frankly, from making mistakes, prevents you from offending me. Like, we have to have an organic human conversation that isn't fraught with, oh, where's my rule book? I've got to check white fragility so that I don't fuck up and Wayne never talks to me again.
Yeah.
I feel the same way, Auden. I mean, I'm probably more nervous. I mean, sometimes, now, because I never knew, like, when we first met Wayne, we had people ask, like, like white people ask, like, can I say Black? And Wayne was like, yeah, I think you can say Black, right? It's all these, like, questions that came out that no one could, who are they going to ask, right? So in a way, the society that it is right now is like, we're all kind of walking this strange thin ice on dirt. We don't mean to, we're just trying it. Like, we're all good people on this call. I've sat in meetings and talked about white fragility, and I've talked about all that. And people get offended. I mean, it does raise the hackles up. People like, we talk about like, why, I worked for everything I had and I didn't, I don't have, I'm not that person. I'm like, it's just that people don't understand what it means. So that's what this show is about. We'll continue to kind of have these discussions, have, Auden, have you on the show. Wayne will continue to work closely with you on these because it's just continued education. I mean, like Wayne is open-minded and look at what you're teaching him, and what you're teaching other people. So that we appreciate. I want to start wrapping up so we can continue talking more, but I want further recording wise, so we don't lose too many people if we go too long. And we can have you back on for more information. The one thing I want to ask, and businesses are looking like Black Lives Matter, or one of the things, Wayne, as we close out here, Wayne suggested we support racial justice instead of that, right? And we kind of before this, we were kind of talking before we started this show. It's like one thing I ask companies to do when I'm working with them is it's great to have a stance, right? And to put a banner up or to pass out stickers, but what happens after that? Like, where does Aspen Skiing Company, do they have a website? Do they have a program? Do they have something happening that's deeper than the banner that's on top of the mountain, right? Because I think what I hear, Wayne, and I'm sure, Auden, you're doing this because already they have a role of somebody like in a position that most companies don't. But, Wayne, what do you think should happen? I tell companies like, have a deeper thought process, bring in an expert, bring in a Wayne, have those conversations with employees and with community, which I believe Aspen Skiing Company is doing, but a lot of companies don't. We just put up like me, I could just throw up a Black Lives Matter banner, on Instagram and then say, yeah, we support, but we haven't done anything else. Thus why the show started to come out. I don't know, Wayne, any thoughts on that? Like, the positives of what you're seeing organizations do? Or don't do this, Wayne.
I guess I'm gonna be like a politician. I'll just answer a different. I'll answer a different. I'll answer a question that you didn't ask, and I won't answer the question that you did ask.
Perfect. I expect nothing more. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I guess I wanted to say that first. Okay, you just referred to me as an expert. All right. There isn't such a thing. If there were, we probably wouldn't be sitting here. There probably wouldn't be the need for us to sit here and having this problem if we'd had a bunch of experts over the years fixing things. All right. This is the push for civil rights and racial justice isn't new, but what we're doing right here today, it is new, right? There isn't a blueprint for it. If there's a blueprint, Auden would just go buy it, follow it, and boom, fix things. I try, I bust my ass to stay just one step ahead of the people I'm talking to. I really do. I'm just trying to stay. I'm just trying to stay a little bit ahead, which is okay because I'm not trying to move people a huge amount. I'm only trying to move people a little bit. So I guess if I'm one step ahead, I guess I'm okay. I do want to go back to though. Auden was talking about, conversation, and my project is called Civil Conversations. I do want to be clear that I really personally, I support the whole range of what people are doing to move the needle, right? Martin Luther King spoke about violent protest and he was opposed to them, but he said it's the only outlet for people that people have that have no other voice. And so the protests that occurred across the country, really I think primarily since George Floyd was killed, if people hadn't been having those protests, would anybody have been paying attention, right? And the answer to that is no. So I really support the whole gamut from protest to to trying to gently move people along with civil conversations. I'm on that. That's where and that's my role. But I support the whole gamut. And having, we've kind of said this before, having just getting people, kind of to Auden's point, like us, he and I feeling comfortable with one another. talking about race. I mean, that's comes naturally to us, I guess, but it does not come naturally to most people. Going back to, it's not about race. It's about class. Okay, because God knows, as a white person, there's something I can't talk about race. I'm really, really, really uncomfortable with it. So, just moving, just moving people to the goddamn point where they can, unemotionally talk about it. I used to think that my audience was moderate conservatives, right? Like the far right. I can't reach them. Moderate conservatives might be able to, but fairly recently I concluded that my audience is also liberals, because when they talk about racial justice, they talk about it exclusively through emotional terms. You're like, can't you see how awful this is?
Yeah.
No, not really. I'm not being moved by your passion, and so even the moderate left needs to learn enough where they can talk about race, with some meat and not just passion.
Those are good points, Wayne. And I will try not to call you an expert. You're more of an expert than me. I'll call you more of a guide. Okay.
Yeah.
You're more
Please.
of a guide, but
Yeah.
I feel like you're more of an expert than me. Auden, I want to get some final closing points as we kind of wrap up this show. And I really appreciate you being on. Again, Auden Schendler, Senior VP of Sustainability at Aspen Skiing Company. And any closing comments, Auden?
Yeah, I mean, I often think about when Muhammad Ali was fighting Floyd Patterson after he had converted to Islam and changed his name, and famously he kept hitting Patterson and saying, "Say my name." Patterson would call him Cassius Clay. And I think there's an element to this movement of naming it. In my climate work for years, there was, well, we don't even have to say climate change. It's about, national security and energy efficiency and energy security. I think that was a mistake. I think we needed to name it. So as we move forward, this question of, do you say Black Lives Matter? Do you say social justice? I think there might be an advantage to being bolder and saying, hey, this is what we're talking about. And if that causes problems and consternation and blowback and social media flaming, that's probably a good thing. Because one of my theses that I've brought to a lot of larger societal issues is, by the time you're having an argument around the dinner table, you've won. So that's what we're trying to change the norms. We're trying to normalize this conversation. I think you guys are part of it, and we look forward to future conversations like this.
Yeah,
well, I do too. Yeah, I think there's, I'm anticipating that the three of us do this again.
Yeah, I'd like to recap with you, Auden, in the future, like what things you're seeing, what you're hearing from other companies and organizations. That's what I love about what Aspen Skiing Company is doing. You're so connected to other organizations, companies. They look to you for your company and your leadership. So, keep doing what you're doing. Wayne and I always look forward to continue conversations with you and anybody else to have about this. Like Wayne said, every day we're just trying to learn ourselves, move forward just a little bit. And I think these conversations are very helpful. With that, I want to say thank you to Wayne. Thank you to Auden for being on the show today. And again, this is Civil Conversations with Wayne Hare, hosted by GROWL Agency. You can see the previous recordings at growlagency.com/CCP. Thanks again, everybody, for listening.
Thanks, guys.